Hello, hello.
Hey, hello everyone.
Mm,
Hey. Hmm. Nice Sunday wherever you are, I hope, whatever time.
good to see you all. Take the time to look around.
Hmm.
Mm,
Kim is home.
mm.
Uh,
Well, we hope you're all doing well through this transition to the next season. Seems like it's started in a lot of places. And so, yeah, let's do a little sitting. Just coming into your seated posture, whatever posture might feel most supportive right now, to a period of stillness and exploration. Getting settled, beginning that process in whatever way feels most appropriate right now. Perhaps as we close the eyes, there's a intentional orientation of the attention toward the body, noticing the ways in which we may be holding the body conceptually in a certain framework in the mind of images or views, perspective. And of course, starting to see the way in which that's quite distinct from this process of receiving the physical sensations of the bodily experience directly. Maybe careful to not try to shut down the mind, but noticing maybe this interplay between sense experience and mental activity. This way the mind orients and references the past or the future, ideas, to try to make sense of what it's experiencing. Noticing that, noticing the emotional flavor of that tendency or flavors. Perhaps noticing the experiences that the mind doesn't need to add on anything to the sense of faith, trust in the body, sensations in and of themselves. Trusting that the mind can feel safe, protected, cared for, no matter what is happening in the body. Noticing sounds, visual impressions, even with the eyes closed, smells, tastes. Often when we come to sit, we know that we can experience the mind as oppressive, the anxieties and tensions and worries, wantings. And so we sometimes try to anchor in the body, ground the attention in the unconjured reality of these formations. But of course, sometimes we see those can also feel oppressive, out of our control, fearful. So the mind goes back into itself for refuge as a place where it feels like it may have a sense of control, tightening, tension. Sometimes it's important to remember that we're not trying to turn off the mind or run from the mind or avoid it, just like we can't run from or turn off the body. And when the mind is very active, sometimes it's better not to try to strain in our efforts to pull the attention away, but we can allow the mind to think, to conjure, to process, to worry, to want. But we can do so in a way sometimes that is leaning into it, not trying to fight the mind, the activity, but diving right in with mindfulness, concentration, interest, not so much in getting involved in the thoughts or the thought process, but of focusing on the present moment, fleeting experience of thought, the torrent of flooding mind moments, not needing them to be clear, letting go of our concern about what we're thinking, how we're thinking, the fact of thinking. Sometimes as we get closer and closer to the origin of the arising of a thought moment, and the next, and the next, and the next, there's a certain degree of abstraction, of incoherence, where these formations are just flooding out. Different images, different sounds in the mind. You can lean into thinking, the emotions, the imaginations, the certain degree of determined interest, energized but relaxed. And in that way, we may sometimes find a deeper relaxation, moving through the concern with all the content of the thoughts as we just experience the rumble, the rumblings. And from there, perhaps the mind has more space to receive the body, to receive sounds, and equally momentary sensitivity to the arisings and passings, to the sometimes indescribable and incoherent, stream of life. So just finding our way without running, without fighting, into this tender but committed relationship with the fleeting, undependable insubstantiality of all that's streaming by.
today's Dhamma talk, I feel inspired to talk about the teacher Dipama, who you've heard us speak of in past talks and retreats, and who had a huge influence on the first wave of Western practitioners coming back from Asia in the early 70s. She was a Bengali woman who lived in Calcutta under very trying conditions. One of the reasons I went to India was to meet her and a few others like her who had practiced with the great Mahasi Sayadaw in Myanmar, or Burma as it was then called. So it was my goal to get into Burma before he passed away. When I met Dipama in 1977, of course, I had no idea that I had only 5 years to meet and ordain with Mahasi Sayadaw. But I certainly got a feel for him and the purity, integrity, and power of his Dhamma transmission through meeting Dipama and one of her teachers, Anagarika Munindra, who was Mahasi Sayadaw's top lay practitioner. As an Anagarika, he wore white robes. He didn't take all the same precepts as either a novice monk or a fully ordained monk. In the center, in the Rangoon Mahasi Yekta, cool and quiet place for meditation. Among all the photos there, you'll see photos of Munindra and Dipama. I met a very gracious and humble human being. I first met Dipama in Bodh Gaya, where she would travel from Calcutta, which it was then called. Kolkata, I think is now its name. She would travel to Bodh Gaya to give teachings. So I met her first there and stayed and practiced for some months in Bodh Gaya. And then later, with a group of friends, visited Dipama in her home in Calcutta. I remember walking up the steps, and in front of me were rats the size of cats, jumping up the steps, jumping out of the way. And it just seemed quite normal to all the people living under those conditions of poverty and hardship. And yet walking into Dipama's room was like kind of walking into a room of light and grace and humility, great beauty. Just getting to how she taught, extracting some from a book by Amy Schmidt called Dipama, The Life and Legacy of a Buddhist Master. A section called 10 Lessons in Life, as taught by Dipama. So I'll quickly read through those 10 lessons so you have a sense of where she was coming from in her teaching and in her heart. And then maybe pause and go over some of them. Perhaps Michelle will anecdote some of the sections from her experience with Dipa Ma. So these 10 lessons to live by, I think, is the section where Dipa Ma says, first of all, choose one meditation practice and stay with it. And secondly, meditate every day. Like, practice now. We are always in the present moment, physically. And we're seeing and hearing things in the present moment. To think of that, and then to think of being mindful, that feeling, sensing, knowing our body and senses are in the present moment, teaches us about the extraordinary nature of mindfulness, sati, pre-verbal, present time awareness. It experiences just what's here, just what's arising now. The yata bhuta, or as it is nature, which is only in the present moment, only here and now. The direct experience of that. So that's why meditate every day. Just to do it formally, then it just becomes secondhand nature after a while. We just find ourselves suddenly shifting gears, and where we were distracted or lost, suddenly that falls away, and we're connected with the words someone is speaking to us, are connected with our own thoughts, aware that we're thinking, aware of any or all of the senses, how we experience the universe. The only way we experience the universe is just our only immediate real experience is the psychological world as we know it, through sights and sounds and fragrances and flavors and textures in the body, imagination, emotions and thoughts in the mind. Meditate every day. Be mindful every day. There's so many creative ways to do that. Thirdly, she said, any situation is workable. And by that, I think she means every situation is an opportunity. So even if it's difficult, challenging, seemingly impossible, still it's an opportunity. How do we react negatively, or how do we respond consciously with knowing, with consideration, care, and mindfulness? So every situation is a possibility, is an opportunity. And then fourth, practice patience. Patience is one of the most important of the 10 paramis. And the Buddha said, patience is the path to nibbana, to liberation. Fifth, she said, free your mind. Usually our mind is filled with story in the 90 percentile range. We're having thoughts about the past, the future, the present. So it's always a story, a narrative going on. Free your mind of stories. You hear us talk about papancha, mental proliferation, embellishment. Free your mind of stories. And six, she said, cool the fires of emotion. And this is a direct teaching of the Buddha. Cool the fires of greed, hatred, delusion. Deepa Ma put it simply, cool the fires of emotion. And seventh, have fun along the way. And with the lightness of Deepa Ma, you knew she was. She enjoyed her child and her grandchild. And when she finally came to teach with us at the New England Center during our 3-month retreats, she seemed curious and amazed by everything. As I indicated, meeting her in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened, where the Bodhi tree, or relative of the Bodhi tree, lives to this day. And then meeting her again in more intimate circumstances at her home in Calcutta. She was the primary inspiration and emotional vehicle that got me to Burma in time to ordain before Mahasi passed away. 8th, simplify. Live simply. We know we're learning right now in this critical crisis of our environment, of our planet that's happening, heat domes and places with no water at all, places with way too much water all at once, and so forth. We're gaining that teaching and learning all the more. How do we step lightly on this earth? How do we make our footprints just a footprint and not a carbon footprint? How do we do that better? I didn't realize the degree to which I'd left that line, a trajectory of simplicity, when we began traveling to teach retreats. Now that they can even cost a flight across the Atlantic or the Pacific, and not moving now for 2 years, being in one place, it's a staggering truth. What it took, the exchange to be able to go and bring Dhamma in many cases for the first time to the far reaches of the earth, cost a lot of the planet's blood, if you will, energy. That's pretty powerful. That's a pretty powerful lesson to live by. And 9th, she said to cultivate the habit of blessing, which I'll talk a bit more about with the Mangala Sutta of blessings, and how we can live our life as a blessing and in extending blessing to others. And 10th, she said it's a circular journey. And I interpret that as it's like coming back to where we started, but our entire mind, body, energy field is transformed, completely different from where it's seemingly the same, but profoundly changed through the Dhamma now streaming through our systems, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So it also means it's a circular journey, and we don't necessarily stop doing what we're doing to go and become a nun or a monk as the only thing that we can do to become liberated and live simply and protect the planet and so forth. It's circular in the way that our circle of awareness, mindfulness, and the Brahma Viharas, the boundlessness of loving kindness and compassion, joy and equanimity, is just that. It's immeasurable and therefore embraces, includes all that we do. So it encircles our family, our friends, our environment, our planet. In that way, limitless, inclusive, and powerful in knowing that it is only in this present moment we can make a difference for ourselves, for all other beings, for the universe. Saying that to choose one meditation practice and stick with it, that's how you get results. U Pandita also said that, and it always reminds me of the Tai Chi master I had in the 60s and 70s here in Honolulu, who taught the Yang style 108 form Tai Chi Chuan, that we include these forms in the graceful movement of Tai Chi as we move about. At a certain point, one gains some mastery by doing Tai Chi every day. And Master Pang said that once we've mastered this form, this 108 form Yang style Tai Chi Chuan, then everything we do is Tai Chi. All movement is Tai Chi. I'm relearning that now in the magician of a Pilates teacher I see, who was also a ballet dancer and a creative dancer and weightlifter champion. And I go there for Pilates, but it seems like we do an extraordinary array of things. Sometimes it's just standing and feeling parts of the body, the muscular system, the baskets that hold the pelvis and the ribs and the head, and the layered nature of these baskets right down to how they hold the muscle group, how they hold the bones, and how our posture and any changes in that posture frees up or makes stuck the energy flow, whether it's our blood, our neural network, our ligaments, muscles, bones, and so forth. So a whole session might be just standing there and learning to kind of bend over or squat. And all the while that I'm doing these exercises, she's drawing out, she's a pretty extraordinary artist. She's drawing out what's happening from the inside. She knows the body on a cellular level. So she's so far in there. And she also has like these stands that usually hold musical scores, but she has anatomy books up there. So after a movement, she'll explain all the layers going on as I'm standing, or as I'm bending over, or as I'm reaching. And then sometimes we move around spontaneously, which is exactly like Tai Chi. Every once in a while, she'll use the word or ask me, did I feel, or do I feel the Chi when I do Tai Chi? And I said yes, and said, well, we're doing that now. And then she'll be quiet and silent, and then again, just moving spontaneously through space, feeling the body, very mindful, very present. Because of her transmission, vocally sometimes, more often with the drawings or the images in the anatomy books, I'm feeling from the inside what's happening. I'm going to take it in and going to become that and feel where it's off or stuck or limited, and feel where it's in flow, where the current is. And all the while, because of my training, it's a mindful movement. It's a mindful dance-like, Tai Chi-like, life-like, just movement through space. And at the end of it, sometimes I'm feeling really relaxed and cool. At other times, I'm just a puddle of sweat, just depending on what we were doing and what she sees. It's never the same. So I think of that. I think of Master Pang saying, when you've mastered it, then anything you do is within the technique. Mr. S.N. Goenka, another tradition, Burmese lineage, he would talk about sticking with a single technique, using the example of it's better to dig one hole 100 feet deep than 10 holes 10 feet deep. Meaning, if you stick with one technique, you'll go deep. You'll get to the well springs of knowledge, of Dhamma knowledge, ultimately of liberation, of unconditional love and kindness and so forth. And once we are drinking from that wellspring, we may include other things we do, indigenous practices, or borrow a little from Zen or other traditions. So I don't feel that as a rigid pronouncement. Get what you can get by not wavering, by taking up your meditation object or subject and learning to be it, learning to be the mindfulness, not do or change anything, because that's not the nature of mindfulness. Just being present, and until the Dhamma current itself picks us up and carries us, until the practice does itself. And we've just made it possible. We've just made the space and are holding the container for that to happen. That's the value and advantage of picking a tradition and staying with it. It makes sense about meditating every day. Not thinking in terms of one meditation formal sitting to the next. Like, okay, I'll get to it later. I'll do it this evening. I'll do it tomorrow. More the attitude that it's always now. It's always here. As soon as we connect, we're meditating. As soon as we connect with a few breaths, if we find ourselves overly involved in something, distracted, and suddenly remember, sati means recollection, to immediately come back to the moment, to remember, and intentionally take a few deep breaths, 3, 7, consciously and feeling the full body of the breath. As we do it, you'll come back to the moment. You're meditating, and for a while, the next things you do, whether it's arranging something, your project you're doing at home, or communication, you'll do it with more awareness. Another way I like to think of it is the body's always in the present moment, and the senses are always in the present moment. What the eye is seeing isn't in the past or the future. All that's absent is that immediate remembering, that magical and mysterious quality of sati, pre-verbal awareness, awareness before embellishment, before construction and fabrication, the world we build moment to moment, most 90-something% of the time. I think I said what needed to be said about any situation is workable, is how she put it, is an opportunity, no matter what's happening, that we all have inside of us. We all have enormous power. All of you have experienced that one time or another on one of our retreats and in sitting. Where did that blast of metta energy come from? Where did that continuous mindfulness for minutes at a time, where did that come from? How is it sustainable? Where did the energy that sustains the continuity of awareness, where does that come from? We have enormous Dhamma virtues within us, and we've all accessed them. Think of it, appreciate it, and then they're there, and we can use them at any time for self-regulation and integration and to help others. If we're being present, others feel that viscerally, and it just seems to chill the room down. I noticed last night, the first time I went to dinner outside of my house here in 2 years. And it was kind of frightening and threatening. And I took 4 or 5 different masks just in case. I had my pockets full of masks, and they were all very old friends, over 20 or 30 years. And a couple of them were medical doctors, a couple of them were their children. And the discussion was really interesting, you know. And I just, I noticed by being quiet myself and not kind of joining when the energy got sort of cacophonous, and that my more measured and more kind of being in my body presence had an effect. And so it sort of tendered the conversation and bent it toward more meaningful conversation, people listening to each other, things related to inner work and understanding, opening, discovery. Helping ourselves, helping others, that's what life is. That's what our challenge is. That's what the Dhamma is. And when she says practice patience, I think of all of the paramis, all of which we practice all the time: generosity, sila, renunciation in the form of meditation, where mindfulness renounces grasping and is relaxed, connected in the present moment, and wisdom and energy. These are paramis by which we've all come to the Dhamma, and when we practice them, we're nurturing them all the more. And then truthfulness, patience is the 7th parami, and resolve to live our lives of Dhamma, and resolve as it's used as a meditation tool. At a certain point in our practice, teacher guiding us through into deeper places, wider pastures through resolution. And the last 2 metta, equanimity, to me represent all four Brahma Viharas. Patience is described as that non-oppositional power. And it also, for me, means acceptance. Like, what is the yata bhuta of this moment? What is the as it isness of this moment? Is it being accepted? Is kanti present? Kanti, the Pali word for patience, or is there resistance? And then is there a surround of acceptance and patience, kanti, for this resistance? Because sometimes resistance opens up a whole new door of discovery, a whole new wellspring of pent-up energy that needs to be freed up. And as the path to Nibbana, we learn that again and again. Again and again, even as insight progresses, which it does. Upandita, the Deepa Ma spoke enthusiastically about how to progress along the path, and that her progression came because of her diligence, her perseverance, and her patience in practicing mindfulness and concentration. She was known to have extraordinary powers of concentration, where supposedly she could visit past lives, like when she was a deva in a previous life, like when she was around the Buddha in that lifetime. Michelle once asked her, how do you do that, Deepa Ma? How do you see into your past life as a deva, a luminous, bright being, or at the time of the Buddha? And her answer was very simple, staggeringly simple and poignant. She says, I do this mind moment by mind moment. With the power of her concentration, she goes back to the previous mind moment, and then the one before that. And then at faster than light speed, all the way back to those lives, and pause where she wants to see. In addition to the powers I just mentioned that we already have, and all the powers that we need for liberation, some people with the gift of concentration choose to be trained that way. I had really strong concentration in my practice from Upandita. I just didn't have the desire to develop concentration much more than that. I did something like it once. I was curious about the psychedelic experiences I had in the 60s, because they actually put me on the path to the Dhamma. One of the teachers of that era, Alan Watts, said about the psychedelics opening us up to the spiritual, when you get the message, you hang up the phone. In other words, if the doors of perception are cleansed and open for a moment because of a substance, which Upandita said was used in past centuries in Burma and India, places like that, by the rishis, the sages. But once you get that message, you don't no longer rely on anything outside of yourself. It's all within. So my resolve, I use my concentration, I resolve to re-experience all those psychedelic, one at a time, the various psychedelics, the peyote that Native Americans use, or mescaline from the cactus, the various sort of spiritual experiences in nature, sometimes guided, that I had in the 60s and early 70s. And it worked. I re-experienced those psychedelic trips, which at the time I thought was amazing. Like I was watching the birth of the universe and seeing myself all the way back to, a two-celled being. But from this perspective, 40, 50 years later, it didn't diminish my gratitude and appreciation for how I got on the path. But the very fact that it was this inner capacity that we all have, if we want to develop it, the concentration used to re-experience the psychedelic experience, disengage any interest in re-experiencing any of those psychological experiences, because the Dhamma speaks for itself, and it's so deep and it's so noble. That's why it's called the noble path. It's rich in its intention of cleansing the heart of greed, hatred, delusion, and leading to nibbana, along with patience. So still, I appreciate Dipa Ma and her powers and hearing about them and hearing, Michelle's discussions with Dipa Ma about those. I think I'll end with the habit of blessings. Before that, she says, have fun along the way. That's, we talk about humor a lot, and injecting our capacity for non-sensual joy and happiness, and using humor when it's really difficult to make a more spacious place around those emotions, our emotional cluster, our challenge, and so forth. Simplify, I talked about. So the cultivation of blessings makes me think of the old texts, ancient early Buddhist texts, the Mangala Sutta. Mangala means blessing. And by knowing the various blessings, and I won't say them all, but they're easy to look up. By knowing the blessings and reflecting on them, cultivating them, then how we live our life, because the blessings include the quality of our speech, the tone of our voice, the words that we carve out, that with the intention that they be understood and are communicated carefully, and the listening capacity, the reciprocity of speech is also understanding what another is saying, often between the words. The words may not always represent what someone's trying to communicate. So we're offering blessings by paying attention to our speech, by generating a surround of dana, generosity, living a generosity surround. And generosity is fulfilled in sila, having that commitment of non-harming. And thus the blessings go: humility and contentment, gratefulness. When we're feeling grateful, imagine how others feel around you. When we're connected to and relaxed in a heart that's grateful, think of its effect on other people. Apamada, which Upanita often spoke of, care, carefulness, mindfulness, non-heedlessness, and so forth. That's a powerful blessing, a powerful way to navigate through the world, and leaving a wake of peace and care and consciousness, with others. The last thing I think of as a blessing when I think of Mangala Sutta and all its blessings was when I did finally get to Burma and I did ordain with Mahasi Sayadaw before he passed away. And I got to visit the old Bagan, where there's thousands of these pagodas and temples dating back 2,000 years. I got there before the military junta of that time bulldozed the original ancient city, bulldozed it into the Irrawaddy River, and built a new modern place for tourists and so forth, and towers for tourists and hot air balloons. I got to spend a few times there before any of that happened. And a friend and student of Sayadaw Upandita's had a key for some of the most sort of secretive pagodas that had paintings in them. And one of the ones that was most affected me was by this 12th century king and queen, Anurata, who ruled by Dhamma. It was a Dhamma kingdom. And in this pagoda, on one wall, it was all the Theravada birth stories, Jataka tales, telling the story of the Buddha, beautifully painted and preserved, why it was locked and no one could go in. And on the other wall was Mahayana tradition, all because his wife practiced Mahayana Buddhism. And you know, there's a powerful example of inclusion. The king was a committed Theravada, elder way Buddhist, and his wife freely practiced the Indian tantric tradition. And so those paintings in the cave-like interior of the pagoda were all these, you know, sensuous figures and the fierceness of Kali and the playfulness, you know, the dance, the fun part. Here on one wall is the Buddhist birth stories leading up to liberation, and here on the other were all these playful figures. In the Mahayana tradition, of course, your aim is to become Buddha. I took the lower ordination with Tangpu Sayadaw, reputedly a bodhisattva, postponed his own enlightenment for a future time to become a Buddha. But I love all these stories. I love how they come together, in this case, in one pagoda, and how they account for the blessings, the Mangala Sutta, that were included in these 10 lessons to live by. A gift from the legacy of Dipa Ma. I think I'll stop there, see if there's any additions that Jesse or Michelle may have, or anecdotal stories, questions about the talk, your practice, whatever your passion is, how you live simply, how the practice always seems to come back to yourself. What inspires you? Michelle, Jesse, anything?
Michelle, you're muted still.
You have to unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think I saw from being around Dipa Ma a lot, having the opportunity to take care of her and teach with her. I think one aspect of her patience that people might not have witnessed, you know, maybe gets across in everything Steve described as her Lessons to Live By. And there was some power of her attention that was very still, like that there was something she was abiding in that seemed like patience to me. And I've never tried to put it into words, but say she was having a conversation with her grandson or her daughter or a yogi. Maybe I've never seen anybody quite attend to, speaking with somebody or being with somebody, but there was a kind of immediate reconnecting with something very deep inside. So she never lost that connection, which I would say she cultivated with a lot of patience and actually diligence. So often people will think of Dipa Ma as this kind of unconditionally loving spiritual mother and very wise. But they didn't always get to see, I think, a firm side of her that again I would say comes from this kind of inner diligence, like that Steve said. She built up this power of practice with, so that when I saw like somebody come to her to figure out when she should fly back to India, for example, or what time she was going to do interviews with yogis, or pretty much any kind of decisions, she didn't waver. Like, she was very firm, and there was not a lot of chit chat about it. She was very firm, and I'm hoping I'm getting across that kind of paradoxical nature of being around Dipa Ma. But people would think, oh, she's very soft and she's so loving and kind, and then she'd tell them to sit 4 hours a night, and their mouth would drop, like it would be like, what? And it's just that she had this very tender, loving side, but she also was kind of firm, and I remember at first being around her, it was kind of almost shocking to me that it was almost like there was no delusion. There was very little delusion. There was just kind of deal with this. Okay, that's done. And then boom, back deep inside, kind of, which I would say happened through a lot of patience with her own practice. Just that it was just remarkable to be around that. The metta didn't make her wishy-washy. So that's one thing I can offer about Dipa Ma in turn, the 10 lessons to live by. I think she had very strong boundaries, very, very firm, very clear, but they didn't seem to have edges.
More than once, we saw her use her fierce compassion on the grandchild behavior.
Oh my, yes. Rishi was out of control most of the time. Yeah. She was strong. That's what I'm trying to say. She's very strong. She wasn't just like the soft, loving kindness, but you didn't really experience it as having edges because there was such a power of this stillness within her that really wasn't involved with much. Like I'd say in terms of number 5, free your mind. Your mind is all stories. When somebody asked her in an interview, a group interview, what is your mind like? And she thought about it, and she said, in my mind, there are three things: concentration, mindfulness, and peace. And then the person said to her, or asked her, is that all? And she said, yes, that's all. And you know, that was power. That's, you could really feel that she was not involved with the stories in her mind. And that's why you could feel this kind of stillness, is all I could call it. And then when she, you know, I'll say one more thing, which is, I think, you know, she had a heart attack the second time she was teaching there. And, you know, her concentration took a hit, but her wisdom didn't. And the power of that loving kindness didn't. So I think a lot of people will have this idea that they need to have a lot of concentration to get fully liberated. But she was an example to me of somebody that what was important didn't change after the heart attack. She certainly didn't have the same amount of energy to have that kind of concentration to go back to the time of the Buddha. But she, when I asked her about that, and she told me right away that that's not important. Like, because I looked horrified. Actually, like I was like, "Whoa, you know, go back mind moment by mind moment. That's just like way beyond my capacity ever." And she's like, "Don't worry about it. Don't even think about it. It's not important. It's not important to get liberated."
I also think of her courageous energy, her virya. She was extremely broken when she got to the Mahasi Center. There's so much loss, her husband, a child, her own body, that she literally climbed up the steps of the nuns and laywomen's meditation hall, climbed up on her hands and knees to get into the hall to listen to Mahasi Sayadaw. And it was through practice that she healed her body. A certain stage of insight, uh, in large part, healed her physical ailments.
Anybody have any questions about your practice, the talk, Deepama?
Just as usual, you can click on that button at the bottom, reactions, and raise your hand if you have a question. Angela.
Hi, can you hear me? In the Deepama book, well, I'm always really inspired by the stories of her students who were her students in India who were householders, just at the robust nature of their own practices while working, while raising families. And I just wondered if you had anything kind of to say about that. I don't know if it's a question, but it always seems that there's so much to contend with in the West. Even though, you know, there's an understanding that everything can folded in, there's just so much that just goes against the nature of the practice here.
Well, I think that's an understatement. So, Steve, I don't know if Jesse, Steve, or me. They do.
Briefly,
yeah.
I think of her lesson to simplify, that even in the conditions here in the West, which are so overwhelmingly materialistic and distracting, and just Michelle's talked before about modulating how much information she takes in, such as the news. We'd be a lot more peaceful just not having to digest all the details of the world news. And also her freeing the mind of all the stories. We can still do that no matter where we are, even with all the input and over input, flooding, in fact, by information and so forth. It is still story, and we can still intend and have the resolve to reduce or regulate the story habit in the mind. I think of those things.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Steve just said. In my early years of practice, I would say you might be able to relate to this, Angela, but when I was teaching school, I would get home so tired. I lived off the grid, so I have to chop wood and get water, kind of, and cook, and I really had to choose between a social life and practice, as well as working. I think that's always been a place where I look in my lifetime, that it's always been a sacrifice that if I wanted to get enough practice in my daily life of work, teaching included, that I really had to give up a lot of friendships. And it was very hard and sad. And in fact, the more I was teaching, the less I was able to have a kind of normal friendships. I had friendships, but not something like I had before. And I think that sometimes this is taught, the practices are taught that you don't have to give anything up. And I would say that's not true. I think something's got to give. I think there's only so much time in a day. And one of Deepama's students that came, I actually taught with her, Krishna, from India, a housewife. She also had a certain amount of support in that culture to practice. She was not working, she was a housewife, but she also had people helping her cook and get things done, and it was still really hard. So I think that the model that I tend to appreciate that we've been offering, at least for COVID times, has been actually to try to, if you can take time off from work and have a week or a weekend or a day or even longer. We've been doing some month-longs, and then of course you have to go back to work, or you have some household duties. I think that model actually is working. I mean, we are having so many people benefiting from this that I would also say it's really possible. Some people did 4 weekends last month and we're working in between. But I would say when you don't get a chunk off, it's very different than, I would say, anytime we're working or busy in our life. It's much harder to kind of explore at the kind of with any kind of protection. But most of my practice life, if I could get a day in a year to practice, I would take it. I wouldn't worry that it wasn't 2 days. I didn't think like that. And I think it really helped my practice. It's like I didn't like be really upset that I didn't have a weekend. I would just take the day and be happy. So with that, and I would love to have next month to practice, but I take off probably next February, and it's like that's how it works for me. But I try to look at my year and say, okay, where can I get some space to practice? And you have to be fierce about it. This is not a joke. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to take uh, a week off and then do some appointments and then, oh, I better do this. And then you don't have the week. You have to like tell people, actually, no, I'm not going to call, and it's hard on your friends. It's hard on your family. And I'm saying that whether that's half a day or a day, like I know how hard it is just to get an hour. But you can,
Michelle,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
didn't Krishna, I remember Krishna telling us that her daily life was her practice.
it
Like,
was. Yeah,
like 99% was her chores and
yeah,
her
yeah.
motherhood. And yeah,
But she was doing them with protection. All I'm saying is that she didn't have a whole lot of people over visiting.
yeah,
She was practicing, but yeah, doing her daily life, similar to what we're trying to get you guys to do.
yeah.
The COVID, it's like, yeah, she didn't go off to a monastery. I think that, and that's what Angela, I think you were asking about. She stayed home.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Of course, I never met Deepa Ma, but one of the things that I feel like has influenced me so much from Michelle's stories and that book and other people is something of the profundity of this question that I don't think is that simple an answer, right? That there's the way in which it's like we understand that she taught a way forward for lay people into the sort of, some of the deepest capacities of insight, that there's not a lot of other lay people we can look to see that possibility. And at the same time, it wasn't like she had started sitting and then had a family and had a career and then it's like she had a family and a life and was like busy and had these catastrophes happen and didn't start practicing until she was like 50 or something, right? Is that Michelle Stephen? Something quite late in her
Probably,
life.
yeah. I think a
Yeah.
little younger than that, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Maybe in her
Wait,
like
yeah.
mid to late 40s. And so then
Yeah.
when she started sitting, it wasn't like she then was like, and I'm going to go back to college and I'm going to start this other project, or like there was a sense of renunciation from that point of like you accept the karma that you have of like, okay, I have kids, I have grandkids, I have these things, these responsibilities. But this idea of creating new karma for ourselves as yogis who are trying to also get free, I think is a place where I get this sense of her boundary and her sense of renunciation. And so that's like, given the context that you're in, yes, there's always ways to practice, right? Of the like sensations of breastfeeding is like one of those, it's in that book, right? Of like the sort of like what she would tell people to note, right? Or stirring the pot, and like that sense of like, okay, there's a way no matter what you're doing to integrate that into your practice. And I think it might also be in that book where she she tells Joseph to, sit for a day. And she doesn't mean like do a day long retreat, right? She meant like sit for a day. And that's like pretty impressive. That's amazing, right? It's an amazing request. It's an amazing notion and to be sort of casual about it, like go do that. And so this sense of like, not that we all should start trying to like hurt ourselves, right? Because probably that really would hurt us on like
Joseph
some
wouldn't
deep
do it.
levels.
Joseph didn't do
Yeah,
it.
right. Joseph didn't do it. So, but the notion that like maybe you should just get up early and sit and stop like being a wimp. It, like there's some level to that that's true, right? It's like, why don't you just like get up and sit, or like stay up and sit a little bit, right? Like there's some sense of like we actually have the ability to create space, and we have the ability to sit while we're tired, and we have the ability to like to actually like put a little bit of gusto into our practice that we might normally kind of crumble under the weight of some of our exhaustion and just daily responsibilities. And this thing, I think, in terms of what I was trying to lead with the sitting this morning, of like, often you don't want to sit because the mind is such a mess, right? That you sit and it's just like, oh, you're just exhausted and you're blah, 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 blah. And like, to get that, like, that's the practice. The practice isn't outside of that. It's just like to sit with the mess and to have it be messy, to have it be sleepy, to have onto, have the body be in pain or whatever. To understand that the practice is not outside of that, right? Of the messiness of our lives either, is important. And it's something that I do think is, yeah, just so beautiful and powerful that has come through to me, from a lot of these stories.
I could add one more thing about Deepama, which was she was actually asked to teach at the Mahasi Center in Burma after she practiced there, and she was there, and it was a big decision for her to go back to her daughter and grandson in Calcutta. It would have brought her a lot more status and fame and disciples, and she put her family as part of the priority there. So I think also that's important to know about her, that she said it in a way that she just wanted to fulfill and live out her responsibilities in her life. And as Steve said, I never went to India to see her in her own place, but the feeling you get is that she created a little temple, like Steve said, in her home. And I think we all can do that. We all can have a place that's quiet, or even a little nook that's an altar, and to keep bringing it into our home as best we can. And certainly, I think most of us do well with some retreat time. I wouldn't say otherwise. I think it's too hard not to be able to kind of take some time away from I think you put it, I can't remember exactly what you said, Angela, but you put it well. I think how intense the busyness of life and the static of life. I think being able to take some time. And one more thing from that is that, again, what I've been seeing we just did a month, but the people who kind of, a few people kept sitting, and I feel like what I've been noticing is that when you do have a little bit of momentum from getting some time to practice, kind of more protected, you do have more momentum to do what we're saying. So that you have more energy to like do what Jesse just said, which is to stay up a little later and maybe choose to be quiet. I feel like that's a gift of taking a little time off to practice, is that when you go back into your life, you have a momentum to protect yourself. And then eventually you get so tired you don't protect yourself as well. And then you kind of have to, kind of quiet down again and do it again. It's like, that's how we learn. What is it? Number 8, as Steve said, live simply. But it's hard to live simply nowadays. It's a very good question. Mm.
Michelle actually was asked to do an interview. Someone's doing a documentary film on Deepama. Um, mm, and there's some parts of it that are going to be in a film festival coming up I think this winter. She just wrote us about it. But anyway, it was next year, is it? Yeah. Uh, so some great kind of questions and answers and sort of a really great interview with Michelle there. And at some point, depending on whatever happens with the film and however much Michelle is in that, the filmmaker also gave us permission to share the interviews and the Michelle's kind of content outside of that as well. So we'll see kind of what makes it into the film, but at some point, something to look forward to. Some good stories and just some good insight and teachings and sharing some of that transmission of hers. Really wonderful.
I'm glad, Steve, that you decided to talk about her.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah,
really great.
always inspiring.
Before we go, I just wanted to also let folks know if I had posted it on the Vipassana Hawaii Facebook, but I have a radio show I do most Sundays, and today I had Michelle as my guest DJ, and so I'll put the link to the recording right here on a Dropbox if anyone wants to listen to the songs she picked for a couple hours, some good stories and good also insight into the role that music has played in her life and continues to play. And so yeah, feel free to check it out.
It's music. It's music,
Music.
it's not a straight Dharma talk. So you need to know what you're getting yourself
Yeah.
into.
And I say that part of it is like, you may not know this, but it's really like it's such a faux pas in our world when we're working with yogis to stick a song in their head. Because if you're in silence, for 10 days or a month or whatever, it's just like, how just horrible it is to have like something that just like won't stop. And if you feel like the teacher has done that, it's like something we always really try to avoid. So we don't talk about music a lot. Of course, also the non sort of Dhamma aspects of it. But here was a fun chance to let Michelle open up a little space for her to talk about that and just listen to some good music. All right, friends. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michelle. Wonderful to see everyone.
I agree that talking about Deepama is like feeling a lot of grace. So thanks, Steve. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, everyone.